you can hold on, if you can hold on.
It was our ponytails that gave us away, bouncing high on top of our heads, just above the tendrils of the pea plants our mother had coaxed from the northern Maine soil earlier that summer. She'd come out to hang laundry in the sun and seen the bright pink ribbons she had tied in her hair that morning, mixed in with the intense green stems. "Girls," she'd call, "please stop picking the peas. We need them for dinner." My little sister and I were the two youngest in the house that summer. We were a blended family. My mom had 5 children, my dad 2 when they met, and then they decided to have Lindy and I together. My dad had a good job, but there were still 11 mouths to feed. Lindy and I often snuck out to the garden to feast on whatever was ripe for the picking. There were a few raspberry bushes and a long line of carrots we'd go for sometimes, but more often than not, we'd creep to the rows of peas and pop the sweet pods in our mouth. We'd giggle and play and pass the summer days away in our own little world, hidden and safe there under the shelter of the pea plants. It would be a few years until we learned how truly shielded and protected we had been. Summer wilted into winter, and in the middle of a cold night, my sister and I are wrapped up together in the quilt from the bed we shared. We're put into the back of our station wagon. Still in our quilted enclosure, we're then sitting in a house that I do not know. One dim light illuminates my mother talking to a man and a woman that I do not know. Their faces look sad and serious. We're curled up in the back of the dark car again, driving down a dark road. Looking out the window, I see the lit up skyline of a big city in the distance. And looking beside me, I see my sister's sweet, sleeping face. I don't remember someone sitting Lindy and I down and telling us what happened that night. She was only 3 and I had just turned 5, so it wasn't until we were older that those details emerged. As years passed, I came to know we had been on the run. We had been escaping. My mom had finally pressed charges against my dad for the years of abuse he had been inflicting upon my older siblings. He was being held in jail that night, and my mom had heard that a social worker was coming the next day to take us all away. Having been in an orphanage herself as a child, there was no way she was going to let that happen. She loaded us up and set off without a place to go, only knowing that we needed to get away. We ended up in Colorado. It's where my mom had grown up. Her brother still lived there, and it's where she felt safe and at home. She struggled to take care of all of us. She always worked multiple jobs and then would take whatever side work she could find. There were times we were on government assistance, and I remember having to drink powdered milk and not even having 99 cents to spare for a loaf of bread. Once it was my turn to bring snacks to school, and all we had were some little white boxes that read generic raisins. At school that day, they may as well have been a billboard flashing, "Kate's poor, Kate's poor," and I was totally embarrassed. Being poor made it difficult to have friends. Lindy and I were lucky, though. We didn't need other friends because we had each other. We didn't have many playthings, so we'd make up games like olden days. It was fine that we didn't have all the new electronic toys and games, because back in that time, they didn't have them either. So we'd make our mud pies and tidy up our cottage and rake the dirt in the driveway to look like the garden we'd had in Maine. Our older siblings did a lot to help take care of us, but we all knew that it was our dad that had caused the pain and precariousness of our childhoods. And there was a fracture between us and them, the abused and the spared. For a single mom, before and after school was vital. Lindy and I would get dropped off before the sun came up, and we were often the last to be picked up. We didn't mind the early mornings and late afternoons because during that time we were together. It was really just an extension of our playtime at home, only better because the school actually had toys and books and games. The hard part came when we had to go to our separate classes. And that's when there'd be tears of protest and softly whispered consolations. Let's try to meet at the bathroom at 10 today, okay? I would say to Lindy. Okay, I'll try, but if I'm not there, wait for a few minutes, okay? She'd reply. Huddled together in one of the stalls, we'd try and make each other laugh and assure ourselves that the rest of the day would go quickly. Time did pass quickly, and some years later, we found ourselves living in Arizona. It was just my mom, Lindy, and I. And for the first time in our lives, we had our own rooms. We were in middle school by then, and being the older, very mature sibling, I declared it was time for Lindy and I to finally start sleeping in our own beds. We had shared a bed nearly our whole lives, even when we didn't have to. And it's not that I necessarily wanted to sleep alone. It just seemed like that's what we were supposed to be doing. I made a grand proclamation at dinner about what was coming that night. Lindy agreed that it was time, but as the night wore on, I could see the anxiousness grow on her face. In about 3 minutes after we went our separate ways, I heard a soft knock on my door. Lindy peeked her head in, and before she could even ask, I pulled back the covers and said, come on in. I'll never forget the smile that spread across her face, and I was secretly relieved to have her curled up beside me and closed together once again. By college and Lindy, were finally sleeping in our own beds. It's kind of hard to sleep with your boyfriend if your sister's in the bed. At least it was for us, because we're not that kind of sisters, okay? We were roommates for a while, and then life continued happening. We moved away with those boyfriends. Those boyfriends became husbands, and there was some more moving. We were never more than a couple hours drive away from each other, though. Right after work on Friday, if one of us needed the other, we could hit the road and be together again by dinner time. So, when my husband was relocated to Europe, that posed some challenges. For the first time in our lives, Lindy would be making memories without each other. And for the first time in our lives, the geographical and emotional distance between us was daunting. For the first time in our lives, we couldn't really relate to what the other one was going through. And for the first time in our lives, we were not in the same pod. In a museum in Barcelona one day, I came to a painting of two girls. They were separated by just a small lake, and if the girls had reached out, they probably could have touched hands. But the look on their face was such that I knew the small expanse was insurmountable and permanent. And it was in that moment I realized Lindy and I needed to create our own lives and be our own selves, even if we didn't really want to. Figuring out who you want to be is hard enough, and harder still if there's this extension of yourself that needs to be included. Finding a way to stay close, but still be individuals, has been a challenge for us. We've now settled a few states away from each other. Lindy lives in Colorado, and we've extended the family by adding some new, adorable little humans. Our two boys have become naturally good friends, and we didn't push it, I swear. We still talk daily and see each other whenever possible. As the years continue to come, I have no doubt Lindy and I will continue to comfort and console and cajole one another. Being together has always been so much better than not being together. My memories of us in the pea plants are some of my first, and the times I've shared with Lindy are some of my best. We've come to realize we do need our own pods, but we definitely need to be on the same stem.